SPR
Oil
levels or
prices are moving
something
higher
else,
as
or
hopes of a
even
quick
the Trump
reopening of the
administration?
Strait
What
of
exactly are
Hormuz
we
fades.
getting those
Brent crude
signals
has
from, and
climbed
what
back
can
towards
we
the high
actually look through?
80s after a sharp
Well, I think
rally
we
this
can
week, but
trust the reports from
remains
the
well below the
OECD and from other
triple-digit
nations
peak
about the
seen
reserves
earlier
that
in
they
the year. Now,
have
the
and the
market had
amounts of oil that
predicted
is
and
currently
priced in
in
a
the
possible
system, and
US-Iran
what
agreement
oil
that
resources
could
are
restore
available from
shipping
elsewhere
through the
to other
strategic choke point.
oil-producing
Now,
countries,
that
whether
deal
that's
has yet to
Venezuela or the
materialize,
US
with
itself,
Tehran setting
or any other
conditions before
nation.
the strait can
In terms of
fully
what's going to
reopen.
happen
And for
between
now,
the
traders are
US and
still betting
Iran,
on a
it's very
compromise
difficult
that
to
could
trust
allow at
anybody
least
because, of
some
course, the
energy flows
US
to resume.
has its
But
own
analysts warn if the deadlock
interest in
drags
talking
on,
up
this
the
calm
imminence
could
of a
quickly
deal and
turn
the
into a
imminence
much
of the
sharper
strait
rally.
opening.
Well,
And Iran has
joining
its
us to
own
break this
interest in
down is
talking up
Mike
the
Buckley,
chances of a
senior
long-term
journalist,
closure.
who's joining us
And
from
indeed, to
London.
be honest,
Thank
I
you
mean,
so much,
Iran
Mike,
has
for
no
joining us
reason to
today.
back down. They're currently in a position of significant
So,
strength.
Mike,
They've closed the
Brent is back
strait.
in the high
There's
80s,
nothing the
but
US
well
can do
below the
about it. The US has
110,
tried doing everything it can
$115 peak
at
seen
Iran
earlier this
militarily,
year.
and it
So, given
hasn't
the
forced
scale of
them to
supply
reopen the
still
Strait of
blocked
Hormuz.
at Hormuz,
So
is
we
the
are
market
apparently in
underpricing
deadlock.
the risk of
But
a
until
prolonged
one of those
closure,
two
or
sides decides they
is
want to
this
back
a
down,
rational
currently there's
bet
no
on a
sign
near-term
that that's
compromise?
likely. The Strait of Hormuz. I think they are underpriced. So this could run for a long time. And it's quite hard to see this now and being broken. The US has tried repeatedly to persuade Iran to reopen the Strait. There's no sign that Iran has decided that it's in a position of significant
Right, but we have seen a lot of times the Trump administration telling us or posting it on Truth Social that Iran is backing down or they won the war. Do you really think that the situation that is happening, and if an agreement is to happen, what do you think would be something that Iran or US had to back out from? Would it be like the Strait of Hormuz, or would it be something else that they would have to give up in these agreements?
All of this is a long list of things that it's very, very difficult to see. The issue really is the Strait of Hormuz, and it is. However, we must also recognise that the US president and Iran, as we know, I think last week started the war in February in an unprovoked attack on Iran and the people of Iran. So it's completely understandable that Iran shipping was able to have some progress to make sure that it has something to show. There were no toll charges, no threats from Iran or from Iran, the actions that shipping from the US. It was an open international waterway.
Right, Mike, and
what
specific triggers would make you shift from the calm scenario to the sharp rally scenario? Is it the duration of closure, inventory draws, or a fresh escalation around the Strait of Hormuz? Like, what exactly are we looking at this point?
On shipping going through, well, I think it's likely that we're going to see a spike in oil prices in coming weeks, because so far lots of nations in the world, I mean every nation in the world, are having to use their strategic reserves. I can imagine that the US, the Iranians, are all thinking nations that this is one way to treat those reserves. It's very unlikely that they're going to get gas to make sure that they can get through from the US like this, where there is it may impose the supply on shipping. As the supply, as these strategic reserves dwindle as they use, that puts more and more pressure on the US administration, and that's going to raise the Strait of Hormuz opening. And entirely possible we could see an oil price of around $20 or even $40. Guarantee that in coming months, if the US action is taken, this is going to put increasing pressure on Donald Trump and the US administration. They are, of course, also under pressure. And I think it would also need to, in the US, discussions with the Israeli about $4, get it to a gallon, and they're also under pressure because of the imminence of their midterm elections. And also, and everybody knows, or it seems incredibly likely, that if the oil price stays high, gas prices stay high in the US, and it of course has an impact. It's hard to see that happening in the next few months because of the imminence of the Israeli election. This is likely to make there's all these different issues and factors coming together and enhance the all of which indicates that a swift resolution to the problem in the Strait of Hormuz is unlikely. And if that happens, it would severely restrict what Donald Trump is able to do for the remainder
Iran
of his
has
term.
repeatedly
So
said
this is a
that the
high-stakes,
Strait of Hormuz
high-pressure
is
situation for the US because of the situation in the
for the
Middle
country.
East.
So
It's
is
also
the
a
threat
high-stakes
of
issue
closure
for them
primarily a military
as well because of these
deterrent,
coming
or
elections.
is it
But they don't have
something
an
that is
easy way
becoming now
out.
a
If he caves
realistic
into the
policy
Iranian demands, he
option
will
for
look like
Iran?
he's a coward and a quitter, and that he's failed. Maybe realistic policy failure for them to impose charges on shipping that goes up and down the Strait of Hormuz. And it's a waterway that refuses to agree to the entirety of that waterway. It's then not the oil flows any shipping from that up or down pressure on the US is a threat of the global economy. An attack from Iran.
Right,
and from Iran's
Mike,
perspective,
we
that
have
makes sense on
seen
two
a lot
fronts.
of
Firstly, the
reports and
chance to make
analysis
significant
which
income.
point
And they
to a
obviously have a lot
possible
of
tipping
rebuilding to
point
do
in
after
early
the
quarter
US
four
attacks
when
earlier in the year.
OECD stockpiles may no longer absorb the supply shortfall. So, how confident are you in that timeline, and data should we watch to confirm it? Weekly inventory reports, SPR levels, or something else, or even the Trump administration? What exactly are we getting those signals from, and what can we actually look through?
To safeguard itself, its infrastructure, and its population. Can trust the reports. So it's acting as a rational about the reserves that they have, criticising it for that is in the system and what's not resources are available from elsewhere. So other oil they will defend off their population. That's Venezuela or the US itself. Earlier in the year, we saw significant numbers of their most senior leadership what's going to happen in many cases, the US and Iran. They want to prevent that difficult to trust anybody because, of course, the US has its own
before wrapping this conversation up,
in
a prolonged closure scenario, some models point to crude moving towards $120 to $140 a barrel, with tail risk estimates even higher. So do you see that as a low probability tail risk or a plausible base case if flow stays constrained into the fourth quarter?
The US has tried doing everything it can. I think if Iran militarily stays constrained into the fourth quarter and certainly beyond, I think it's inevitable. So we are apparently in deadlock. But until one of those two sides decides they want to back down, the price rises, that's likely to limit people's use of it. The Strait of Hormuz will remain closed. With oil and gas, it's very difficult. It's quite hard to see this deadlock being broken from a climate perspective without significant dependency on fossil fuels. There's no sign, as we know, a huge amount of it comes down this waterway.
Right, but we have seen a lot of times the Trump administration telling us or posting it on Truth Social that Iran is backing down or we have won the war. Do you really think that the situation that is happening, and if an agreement is to happen, what do you think would be something that Iran or US had to back out from? Would it be like the Strait of Hormuz, or would it be something else that they would have to give up in these agreements?
The issue really is the Strait of Hormuz, and
is actually a very vital point as of now, as we're speaking, and we'll have to see through what exactly is going to happen soon. But thank you so much for walking us through the Hormuz standoff, the oil markets, delicate balancing act, and what a prolonged closure could mean for prices, inflation, and growth as well. We'll continue tracking how this unfolds and what it means for energy bills, inflation and markets. So thank you so much, Mike, for joining us today.
International waterway. Thank you. Of course, one of the things that Iran has learned through the conflict and through the war is that it does have effective control over this very important international waterway. And I think it's therefore proposed that it will introduce a toll on shipping going through, which of course will be a significant revenue generator for it. Given the huge losses it did suffer when it was under attack from the US, I can imagine that the Iranian government will be thinking, this is one way to recoup those losses, because it's very unlikely that they're going to get reparations from Israel or from the US government, but it will need an income stream. So it may impose the toll on shipping going through the Strait of Hormuz, either temporarily to recoup those losses or in perpetuity. I think a win for the US administration now would be the Strait of Hormuz opening and it being toll-free, as it being tax-free from the Iranian government. But there's no guarantee that will happen. I think the US may need to pay some reparations. It will certainly need to remove its fleet from the end of the Strait of Hormuz. And I think it will also need to have discussions with the Israeli government to get it to withdraw from Lebanon, for example, possibly get it to withdraw from Syria, and also take action to protect the people of Gaza and to restrict settler activity and attacks in the West Bank as well. But it's hard to see that happening in the next few months because of the imminence of the Israeli election. So there's all these different issues and factors coming together, all of which indicate that a swift resolution to the problem in the Strait of Hormuz is unlikely.
Right, and Mike, Iran has repeatedly said that the Strait of Hormuz is a strategic asset for the country. So is the threat of closure primarily a military, deterrent, or is it something that is becoming now a realistic policy option for Iran?
It's definitely a realistic policy option for them to impose charges on shipping that goes up and down the Strait of Hormuz. It's a waterway. They've got access to almost the entirety of that waterway. It's not safe for any shipping to move up and down because of the threat of an attack from Iran. And from Iran's perspective, that makes sense on two fronts. Firstly, the chance to make significant income, and they obviously have a lot of rebuilding to do after the US attacks earlier in the year, but also as a protection against further US attacks. So if Iran is saying we will not open this strait of water that the EU and the rest of the world wants to open, you need to not attack us anymore. And Iran clearly has to find ways to prevent the US attacking again and to prevent attacks from Israel as well, to safeguard itself, its infrastructure, and its population. So it's acting as a rational actor, and criticizing it for that is not tenable. Of course, they don't want further attacks. Of course, they want to safeguard their population. And of course, earlier in the year, we saw significant numbers of their most senior leadership attacked and in many cases killed. And they want to prevent that happening again as well.
Right, Mike, and just before wrapping this conversation up, in a prolonged closure scenario, some models point to crude moving towards $120 to $140 a barrel, with tail risk estimates even higher. So do you see that as a low probability tail risk or a plausible base case if flow stays constrained into the fourth quarter?
I think if flow stays constrained into the fourth quarter and certainly beyond, I think it's inevitable the price will rise. That's what happens when access to a product or a good is restricted. The price rises to limit people's use of it. Of course, with oil and gas, it's very, very difficult because our global economy, sadly, from a climate perspective, is still very dependent on fossil fuels. And as we know, a huge amount of it comes down this waterway from facilities in the Middle East. So until different infrastructure is put in place, for example, a pipeline across Saudi Arabia, the Strait of Hormuz is going to remain important. And I think even if such a pipeline existed, the Strait of Hormuz will remain important. So we could be looking at very significant price rises. What that will mean, of course, is a very, very difficult situation for national economies and for the global economy. And it is almost certain to push some countries into recession, which will make life difficult for ordinary people.
Right, Mike. The Strait of Hormuz is actually a very vital point as of now, as you're speaking, and we'll have to see through what exactly is going to happen soon. But thank you so much for walking us through the Hormuz standoff, the oil market's delicate balancing act, and what a prolonged closure could mean for prices, inflation, and growth as well. We'll continue tracking how this unfolds and what it means for energy bills, inflation, and markets. Well, thank you so much, Mike, for joining us today.
Thank you. Lovely to talk to you.